Good morning. I'm Lisa Lauer, and I'm a member of the Professional Standards Board. I represent special education teachers, and so my background is in deaf education, so if you start, my hands start going, because that's about the only way I know how to talk, because I can't talk if my hands aren't going. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. He is the CEO and founder of Teaching Quality, Center for Teaching Quality. He only asked, I asked him, hey, is there something you want me to introduce you about or special? And he said something about the person that he rode with here. So I'll let him go ahead and expound on that. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Barnett Berry.
Hi, y'all. Can you tell where I'm from? It's also great to be back in Kansas, and it's great to be with my old friend Ken Weaver and my really old friend Rick Ginsburg, who, by the way, the dean at KU, who I tried to convince Lisa to suggest that I'm a whole lot better looking than he is. But I guess that didn't quite work out, but I am. No, it is wonderful to be back here. I've had wonderful opportunities from time to time to be in your state, to work with teachers like these five fabulous ones to my left here. Megan, Signe, Wendy, Jennifer, and Nicole. And in fact, so much of our life's work has been at CTQ, is to elevate not just the voices of teachers like you guys, to also refer to the fact that I'm bilingual. I can also speak Northern from time to time, but also support your leadership. And as Debbie suggested, and Michelle as well, filling that leaky bucket, or making sure, or putting holes in that leaky bucket, so it does not continue to cause us to lose our best teachers. We need to do some remarkably different things with teacher leadership. Now, here's the good news, and thanks to Michelle and Debbie, I was able to spend time with, at least online, with some of the good work that y'all are doing, and I read Randy's report from 2016 on the Blue Ribbon Report on teacher supply and demand. You're definitely on to everything you need to do. You have a policy framework that I think it has the beginnings of beginning to solve the problems that you are facing. But I also would like to suggest that now is the time to accelerate those results. Your rural opportunity zones, the Mercury districts, the 2+2 partnerships, and I'm looking over here to my left, the Keen Network, all are pieces of the puzzle that you can begin to put together in a comprehensive strategy. Much like every other state in the United States, everything that needs to be done to recruit and retain teachers is already being done. We just don't have one place that's put all of those pieces together. And I'm going to suggest today there are ways to do so, there are models to do so, and now there are tools and processes that we didn't have 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I was working with KDE on the work of the National Commission on Teaching America's Future, which was my first venture into Kansas somewhere back in the 90s. What I'd love to do in the next 30 minutes or so or less is kind of put out an array of images, national data, some new evidence that we are, and I'm proud to say, working on at CTQ inside of North Carolina, where CTQ is based, around working additions and teacher retention and school performance, and get under the hood of some of that data. Some of the data that Richard presented to you last year, and I'm gonna do a little bit of an overview to kind of bring some of that back to light here. But there's a lot more nuance to be discovered and drawn upon in beginning to solve these problems. And I'm going to suggest today it's the nuance that's going to make a difference. I'm also going to suggest at the end of the day, there are about 4 things you really should do or could do, must do, and only about three of them don't cost a whole lot of money. Okay, so I want you to remember those. There's going to be four things when I get done in about 28 minutes that we're going to hopefully push the conversation forward, and three of them are not going to cost a lot of money. Where's Jim Porter? Jim's got one of them already on his mind, and how do you accelerate the idea that Jim had is definitely on my list, okay? Thank you, Jim. So I want to just do a quick, why am I up here in front of you? Just to set a little more context for you. So unlike these five fabulous teachers over here and many of you former teachers in the room, I left teaching after 3 years of an urban classroom don't even want to say how many decades ago. But ever since I left the classroom, honestly, 1981, okay? I've not been teaching K-12 kids since 1981. I've been either a scholar of or an advocate for the profession. My work actually with Rick at the University of South Carolina, I finally remember late 80s, early 90s, one of the first major studies we did together was on work conditions in South Carolina and the relationship between the conditions that teachers were facing in that era's school reform climate, which was pretty intense, but nothing like you guys have experienced. But we found strong relationships between working conditions that teachers were facing, school reform mandates that they were responding to, and burnout. But the most interesting finding, right, Rick, that we found is that teachers, despite the challenges they were facing and the high levels of burnout that they were experiencing, it was not that they were not committed to teaching and kids. They remained steadfast in their commitment to children, just like educators are today, but they were emotionally exhausted. And I would say today we're still facing that type of crisis. We have teachers who are working extremely hard, harder than ever before, and we've got to do something about their emotional exhaustion. So the work that we do at CTQ has always been about, since our inception 20 years ago, is to better understand these conditions, but also over time and over the last 10 years or so in particular, we shifted from doing a little bit less research in trying to understand the problem to beginning to try to solve the problem by creating a grassroots network of teachers to lead. And now some of the tools and processes that we developed with teachers, thousands of them in an online community, are now getting inside the system. So I'm proud to say some of the issues that we're raising here today, we're trying to help states like South Carolina, Pomona Unified District in California, Jefferson County, Louisville, Kentucky, and a number of other places begin to put into place the kinds of systems of not just teacher leadership, which I have a strong bias toward, but also collective leadership, where we build opportunities for teachers and administrators to lead together. So what I would love to do now is to kind of take us into a set of images to think about the profession as it was and it is today, and how the public narrative is extraordinarily important to shape, support, and understand as we bring the evidence of what matters most for working conditions, teacher retention, and school performance. On page 17 of that report, Randy, y'all pointed out that it's time for the state board to begin marketing teaching as an attractive profession. So with that in mind, I want to turn to some images that I came up with that I thought might provoke our thinking about where we are in this country. Where are we in Kansas, and how teachers are portrayed? Does anyone recognize this picture? 1950s genre film. Jennifer Jones is the actress. Good Morning, Miss Dove. Does that ring a bell for anybody? Well, do the Google when you get home, or if the speech gets boring, open up your computer and go look at it right now. This was kind of the iconic image of a teacher, school marm, if you will, who gave up romance in order to devote her lives to kids and community. Now, she was a strict disciplinarian inside of those four walls of her classroom, but never was she expected to do much leadership outside those four walls. 1950s image of the teacher in America. We've come a long way, but we still have a ways to go. Now, I know you know this one, right? You got this one? Okay. This is Robin Williams as John Keating, a real-life story. Welton Academy, I believe. The Rhodes Scholar turned teacher jumping up on the desk. Should not know. I'm no Rhodes Scholar and I can't jump on a desk, so I'm not going to do either. Anyway, the whole point was carpe diem of the movie, right? And how a dynamic, charismatic, superhero-like teacher can inspire young people to get beyond the confines of education that their parents and the other teachers and educators expected them to adhere to, right? That's the superhero academic. And then, a little more modern version, two of them. One pretty positive, I would say, to say the least. The superhero teacher on the left, that's Jaime Escalante, portrayed by Edward James Olmos in the film Stand and Deliver, the real-life story, right, of the extraordinary calculus teacher in South Central LA who helps and manages through changing classroom culture, not school culture, not district culture, not state culture, but changing his own classroom culture so that all 17 kids passed the AP Calculus exam. Remember the story? He also died of a heart attack. He worked so hard, literally. On the other side of the slide, unfortunately, and I've never seen this movie. I hope no one saw this movie and paid good money. And I remember the first day I saw this billboard, I almost crashed into a car because I was driving down the road in Los Angeles when I first saw this billboard. This is Cameron Diaz. This is 2011. This is not too many years ago. This is the foul-mouthed, greedy, only teaching because she's there to find a man, and the man who wanted her at the school was a gym teacher, and no way was she going to marry another teacher. Awful image of teacher, the bad teacher. So we've kind of went from docile teacher, superhero teacher, evil teacher, or more recently, from Time magazine, number of images, of teachers being rotten. But now, a quick shift, all of a sudden, the narrative is shifting. Teachers are no longer the problem, it seems, but they are the martyrs. Now, I'd much rather the public see teachers as martyrs than rotten, right, Jim? But martyrdom doesn't help us build the kind of professional team of teachers that make 1,500 decisions on a daily basis, decisions that are increasingly more complex with increasingly greater consequences for the children and the students, and the schools that they are serving. So what I'd love to do now in my next 15 minutes is to take that imagery that's in your head and consider how an array of national data, some pretty daunting, ladies and gentlemen, and some pretty enlightening and hopeful, to get us to where we need to go, and those four things that I think we can do starting tomorrow, at least three of the four. The first one here is, this is basically Richard's summary of his recent data, and he has a number of studies that show the relationship between instructional leadership and school performance using state-level surveys, some of which we are using as well as outcomes around performance tests. But Richard suggests now that our profession is larger, greener, more female, more diverse, but also less likely to keep our more diverse teaching candidates. Now, the greener ones are more likely to leave, right? And I'm going to suggest to you, we're going to always be greener. We're not going to be a 3 million member profession all seeking to teach for 30 years. So we got to start thinking very differently about the future there. We also know from national data that states in general that do better with salaries, do better with working conditions, some of which, and Richard shared with you this last year, I am certain, I'm going to do so again today, about how certain professional working conditions does lower attrition, okay, and overall performance. At the same time, let's not forget, and this is where, Randy, we do need more money. There is a 30% wage gap between those who teach today across this country and other professionals that are comparable in their preparation and the complexity of their work. I would say it's probably even greater if you count the complexity part. We also know that the greener part, the modal year of teaching experience in this country, you know what it is today? 3. In 1987-88, when I joined Rick at the University of South Carolina, we were both professors there, it was 14. It's 3. And now 1 in 5 teachers, not unrelated to that first part of the slide on the left-hand side, 1 in 5 teachers, and that number almost doubles for new teachers, is moonlighting in order to make ends meet. Now, how in the heck, it's a technical term, how in the heck are teachers going to continue to develop, particularly if they are lesser prepared than they once were for the demands that they are facing, if they are running out the door at 3 o'clock to get to whatever second job they can find. Now, this kind of daunting news is still daunting, or daunting-er. That's not a word, I just made it up. Forgive me, teachers. We know that about half the teachers in this country report that they don't have opportunities to collaborate with their colleagues. About similar percentages have problems of finding time to do so. We also know that when teachers are asked how engaged they are in their work, this is a 12-item Gallup poll that's been used from time to time. Some districts use this. It's workplace conditions sort of polling. Other professions use this poll too. Teachers were the least engaged group of professionals, and the one item that pointed to their lack of engagement was the one that was simply stated, "My opinion at work counts." That was the item that led to 30% of America's teachers reporting that they're engaged in their work. And so then, going back to even what Debbie had to say, which makes our job even harder. You've seen this, Debbie. This is from the most recent PDK poll from a few months ago, just came out. Same question has been asked for about 50 years. I think I got it right, give or take a year or two. For the first time after all these decades, the majority of parents are less likely to want their kids to teach. It crossed the line from 2016 to 2018. Between the majority saying the majority still wanted their kids to teach, now the majority don't want. 54% of America's teachers do not want their kids to teach. Now, hold on, I'm going to come back to this. 62% of Americans have trust and confidence in teachers. Okay, so we'll come back to that, right? Especially in the marketing campaign, Randy, wherever you might be, that we're going to develop here in the state. Now we can start with some good news and also some more nuanced data about the relationship between conditions of work, and how teachers learn to lead. I'm going to start nationally, then I'm going to go to a deep dive with you. And Debbie, keep an eye on the clock for me, okay? A deep dive with you in this work I'm doing in North Carolina with some other researchers. The first slide, have y'all seen this study? It came out a couple of years ago. Because this gets even a little bit more interesting than some of even Richard's fabulous data around the relationship between working conditions, more professional working conditions, and overall school performance, which is what his latest study found out to be. This study by Matt Kraft and John Pepe, two brilliant young education economists, using some big data sets, actually attaching in one large school district in North Carolina, happened to be Charlotte-Mecklenburg, I'll tell you like it is, thousands and thousands and thousands of student and teacher records, including value-added data that North Carolina has on each teacher in tested grade levels. Okay, got it? And they looked at schools that use this working conditions survey that North Carolina has used, and I'm going to report on in just a bit, that Richard has used to report on what he did last year with you guys. Okay? Same survey. They looked at the relationship between the conditions that teachers reported in their schools, because they had school level conditions data, but had individual teachers who are attached to those schools and their value added scores. You know the old adage that teaching experience really doesn't matter very much? Well, Matt and John blow that myth right out of the water. You know how and why? Under the right conditions, teachers grow dramatically, even on individual performance, if, it's a big if they are in schools that have more professional working conditions. What this slide shows that over 10 years, the gap widens if teachers are in these more professional working environments, their performance is 38% higher than their peers with all the right controls in this highly sophisticated study are performing in schools with lesser or poorer working conditions. Y'all with me on that? Pretty powerful. And if you look at an array of other studies about how teachers get better, and actually some new studies that show how teachers find ways to lead, you see that schools create and support intentional uses of time for teachers to work with each other, and many schools have PLCs. Okay, now PLCs are not always what they're cracked up to be, if I understand. Is that right, ladies? Sometimes not. Anyway, at the same time, we also know that teachers are going to improve in effectiveness and also learn to lead if they have or express value. And I'm going to even say the words public value in what they are learning from and with each other. Many studies have begun to show that this happens more emphatically in schools and districts that are using some form of lesson study where teachers work together around common standards and practice and reciprocally help each other, not one teacher supervising another, but all teachers helping each other. And then finally, we're seeing enormous upticks in teachers leading and getting things done when they find themselves in external networks of support. Now, we could spend a full session, Debbie and Michelle, just on this slide and how schools and districts are beginning to act on these findings. But I want you to keep all this in mind as I jump into the North Carolina study that I promised you, and then getting to those 4 things that we can do. So this work is part of a larger effort in the state to look at the extent to which students have access to high quality education. I will say this off the record, even though I'm on the record here, that it's related to a equity lawsuit that's still under consideration and some interest by governor and state board and others to take some more emphatic action. So this work that I was asked to do with Linda Darling Hammond at the Learning Policy Institute is represented in the next few slides. Now, what I've been able to do, much like what Richard has done, has looked at differences in working conditions in high and low poverty schools. And because my work also includes some in-depth case studies, I thought I might just first, before I get into the quantitative results, show you some particulars, okay, around what is typical of high and low poverty schools in a state like North Carolina. Can y'all, in the cheap seats in the back, Rick, can you see? Even with those 88-year-old eyes, you know, he really looks good for 88. What's that? Okay. Okay, first of all, the low poverty schools, bigger school, not surprisingly. This is kind of a high wealth, more suburban-like community. 61 teachers in this elementary school compared to this high poverty school with 14 teachers. Okay, Michelle, look at the numbers here. You see it? This is you, my friend. So what, I need my eyeglasses. I'm looking at the slide here. 99% fully licensed teachers in the low poverty school, and what, 71% in the high poverty school. Board certified teachers are not, y'all don't have a whole lot of support for board certification candidates, I don't think, or do you? Not much. Some you don't have a whole lot, like North Carolina has had for years. Y'all probably know that. Important point here is 11 out of the 61 teachers are board certified. In the low poverty school, nada. In the high poverty school. Teacher retention, 91% versus 64%. And then I just picked a few illustrative survey items from the working conditions survey to let you see how teachers in these two schools responded in the 2016 administration of the state's teacher working conditions survey. So what's the item here? It is, in schools we take steps to solve problems. Far more percentage teachers were agreeing to that statement in the low poverty versus the high poverty. Parental support. Parents and guardians know what is going on in the school. Again, wide gaps, 97 versus 62%. And then this is interesting too. Reports of student conduct. I'm putting this out there because you'll see in the regressions I'm getting ready to show you, and I'm not going to all the coefficients, thank God, but you'll see how student conduct plays in predicting teacher retention and student growth. But anyway, large percentage differences, between teachers agreeing with the statement about student conduct in the two different schools. So we did some typical type of factor analysis and different regressions to look at the relationship between this 88 item survey with 7 domains. Factor analysis actually suggested there were more like 9. So we looked at the relationship between those factors and whether or not schools were more or less to keep teachers, what their particular retention rates were for the year before and the year after the survey was administered. Then we go in and begin doing focus groups with representative samples of teachers from various types of school districts, and now we're in the middle of 2 in-depth case studies of those high and low poverty schools that I mentioned. Now I'm not going to go into great details here with the regressions and the coefficients, but you can see that leadership matters, community support matters, time matters, PD matters, and they seem to matter a lot when it comes to teacher retention. And dispositions and teachers' dispositions toward instruction seem to matter a lot. Very similar findings around growth, school performance growth on the state's report card. By the way, there was no relationship, very low relationship between working conditions and whether or not schools met growth. But there was serious relationships between those conditions and whether or not a school exceeded growth. Now that has a lot to do, I think, with the report card and the variables we use. But this is extraordinarily important and not anything inconsistent with what Richard has found and probably has spoken to and what you've read elsewhere. Now here comes the interesting stuff, if you ask me. And this will get underneath the hood. And as we get underneath the hood of these conditions, and again, these are just preliminary, the case study, the qualitative work, which Rick knows I love to do. Only thing I love more than that is the work we do with teachers in our networking. But that said, but as you look at these qualitative data that I'm going to report to you, I want you to remember and think about John Hattie's work. Are y'all familiar with his work? Collective teacher efficacy. John is like the guru in the country around doing meta-analyses. He's been doing these for 20 years, maybe, Rick? And looking at what predicts student achievement. And his most recent meta-analysis done a couple of years ago, looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies and using very sophisticated analyses that I couldn't even begin to do, or much less even think about. But he found that collective teacher efficacy, far more than any other intervention, is going to predict student achievement. It's like twice as much as high quality feedback given to teachers. Now what collective teacher efficacy means is not just, and it does mean this, not just teachers' belief they can make a difference, but the actual work they do together that allows them to think and believe that they're making a difference. It goes back to that slide from a few moments ago about how teachers are learning to lead and help each other. My teacher colleagues over here understand this because they live this every day. So let's get to the fun part. So takeaway number one. Now remember, in high poverty schools, teachers reported low levels of student conduct, right? You could tell teachers were frustrated. It seemed to predict whether they're going to leave a school. So here's what we find. Underprepared teachers are primarily more likely to teach in high poverty schools, are also much more likely not to be prepared to serve the social and emotional learning needs of the students they're serving. A lot of their lack of efficacy comes from the lack of preparation. Okay? One administrator from that, remember the high poverty school? So listen to this, my friends. From the case study work, an administrator, and by the way, it's a school district that's in northeastern North Carolina, and they've put in PBIS, and they think this is helping a lot. Some of y'all might be using that system, positive behavioral support system. Okay, but here's what she says to me. Our district is just beginning to prepare underprepared teachers in restorative justice practices. We have a lack of skilled folks to talk kids through conflict, she says. And then we train them, and before they're well trained, they leave. And so then they have to do it all over again. Remember that school that had only 14 teachers and 3/4, they lose a fourth of them every year? Okay. Takeaway one. Takeaway two. Limited pre-service training, related to what I just talked about. Poor salaries and moonlighting undermines new teacher effectiveness and social capital. So if teachers are coming and going all the time, how do they have a sense of cohesiveness among the faculty? How do they begin to trust each other enough to share their practices, open up their classroom doors to not just to each other, but to administrators, or dare say, even teachers from other schools? Much less begin to use technology to share their expertise and learn from others in a just-in-time, 24/7 professional learning environment. Okay, my favorite quote for this idea, this takeaway, you ready for this? This is from a teacher in a low poverty school spends twice as much money per kid in this school district, okay, than the district that I was just reporting to. It's a teacher who's board certified, and she actually, you ready for this, ladies and gentlemen? She actually taught in that district. It was one of those lucky things that you come across in qualitative work. She actually taught in the other district years ago, like 18 years ago. Listen to this. I began teaching in North Carolina in that district. Listen to this. You ready? She says, I love teaching there. I left when my new school opened because I knew there were teachers I could learn from. I was not learning from my colleagues there. They were good teachers, but jaded. Some had not been there very long. Others had been there for a very long time. They were jaded from reform after reform after reform that was put on them. Collective teacher efficacy. We could have kept this young woman in that school district under the right conditions. This gets to the point, too, that's extraordinarily important and gets to me to be hopeful about what you're doing here in the state, Randy, around redesigning schools. Because we have found it is in these schools that have high proportions of new teachers who leave more often than not, and low proportions of teachers who are experienced, deep in content and pedagogy, highly accomplished, low proportions of them, there is a mismatch between the needs of the recruits and the supply of those who could help those recruits. We need schools to look very differently, designed very differently. They need to become more, as I like to say, hospitable places for teachers to live, to work, and live. And live. That was not a Freudian slip. Schools are places that teachers and administrators live. That's what makes a good school, when they not only work there, they live there. Not 24 hours, but it is a family and it's a culture, right? Takeaway 4. This is fascinating. So if you go back to those regressions, I didn't spend much time on them. It appears that leadership doesn't matter quite as much in the low poverty schools as it does in high poverty schools when it comes to retention and exceeding growth. Well-prepared teachers and their collective efficacy can help them overcome the ill effects of administrators who are not in sync with them. I think that's a nice way of putting it. I have fabulous administrators in this room who support teachers night and day. I know that. But that ain't always the case around the country, and clearly not in the case of some of the schools that we are investigating here in North Carolina. So look at this quote here is one that I'm gonna have to edit. Now, if Rick was up here, he would not edit this. But here's what the teacher from the low poverty school told me that helped me think about this takeaway. We have so many excellent teachers here, we can weather any kind of fill in the blank from administration. And they do. So high stability at that school. There have been numerous principals have come and gone. There are many, a third of the school is still there from when it was opened some 18 years ago. And this may be my favorite one. While there are so many challenges that rural communities cannot overcome when it comes to the living amenities that many young people want to experience, especially in their first years after college, or even adults. However, there is extraordinary power in so many rural communities where the ethos of family so easily surface and get sustained. While there are resources that these communities don't have, you know them, many of you are from them, you teach in them, and I'm so appreciative. This ethos of family has yet to be fully marketed and utilized to kind of recruit and retain or prepare from grow your own and retain teachers now and in the future. So let me finish and kind of end on this particular quote and then get into a couple of quick closing remarks. This is from a teacher in a high poverty school district up in northeastern North Carolina. She tells me, "I'm vested in this community. I tried leaving when I went to college. I said, 'No, ma'am, I want my children to live here. I could easily build rapport of teachers and administrators here. My administrator is one of the teachers who was there when I was in elementary school. I feel like when I walk into the doors, it's already a family. For as long as this district is here, I'm going to be here. That's just because my heart is here.'" Now, this same teacher tells me later, if you think about the regressions too, she's frustrated by the lack of high quality PD and the one size fits all the district seems to have to, only has the resources to put in place for her. She knows she needs to continue to learn and develop as a teacher, and the needs of children are far greater than they ever were, and they're getting even more challenging. She wants more to be effective, but she does not want to leave. How do we build upon that? So let me get to the hopeful part of this conversation. If you didn't see kernels of hope already, I hope you did. The first one is 3 out of 4 teachers in America are learning on their own accord in some type of informal professional learning operation, outside of whatever you district folks might be creating for and with teachers. And I think our teachers over here on the left would tell us all the kinds of things they do outside the system. 30% of teachers in America are participating in an external network. Not just CTQ. When we started ours in 2002, I think we were like the only network around, only virtual network, that was for sure. That was 16 years ago. They are all over the place, and teachers are engaging with them left and right. And then this is from a few years ago. I bet the number is higher, percentage is higher. 6 in 10 teachers are using technology to connect with colleagues they would not have otherwise. Now, I'm hoping beginning to see some solutions that you might not have thought of otherwise. We also know from a few years ago, teacher leadership, Michelle, hybrid roles. You ready for this? 1 in 4 teachers in America in a survey conducted a few years ago reported that they were extremely or very interested in teaching and leading without leaving the classroom. That's a big number. That's what, 600,000-700,000 teachers or more in this country want to work in that way? It's a very big number. By the way, 84% from the same survey, 84% of teachers in America do not want to be principals. Yep, got a yes over there. We also know from not just top performing nations around the world how time is being reconfigured so teachers can both teach and lead. We've done some work, and other organizations are doing the same, where teachers themselves, who once before only had an hour a week, maybe 90 minutes a week to do anything collaborative with a colleague, by looking differently at schedules, looking differently at resources, looking differently at people. This pilot in Kentucky that we engaged in a few years ago, a group of teachers in a school found 4 hours a week for them to help each other get better without spending one more dime, and without changing the bus schedule as well, administrators. Pretty darn cool. Solutions are in the minds and heads of many teachers and administrators. And when I looked at your Mercury project and others that are out there, it reminded me of New Zealand, which several years ago is now spending more and more money, not just on a school innovation fund, but on a teacher leadership innovation fund. This is one of those things where I love to see the states put more money into it in different ways. But they are investing in teachers themselves and teams to come up with their own ideas, and the state would actually give them the resources from $5,000, $10,000 to sometimes even more to go forth and incubate, execute, test, refine those ideas. I love the fact, I'd love to learn more, Michelle and others, about what you're doing here in the state to fuel innovation, because I am absolutely certain that we're not going to solve the retention problem, we're not going to solve the school improvement problem, and we surely aren't going to solve the school transformational challenge. That means not just helping kids do better on a test score of the 21st century, but also prepare them for their life's future in a global economy, in a gig economy that requires a whole different array of skills beyond just meeting core academic content. We cannot do this without dramatically changing schools. So let me close by offering those four things. The first one's expensive. The first one does require more money to improve salaries, but also requires us to think differently about funding schools. Funding them not just for more equitable needs of kids, which is how most school funding works. Imagining a school funding model that also funded schools on more equitable needs of teachers. I think about the school that has high proportions of new teachers and low proportions of experienced, accomplished teachers like these 5 fabulous educators to my left. How can we start thinking about funding that way? Now here comes the easy stuff, Randy. There's this thing called the internet. More and more teachers are utilizing them. How can we think differently about spreading expertise, building space and time? Yes, and time is money, but building space and time. Teachers are already spending time online, finding resources. How do we organize that to help expertise spread, help leadership develop, and good stories go public with that evidence that only they can supply? So that's one. That will not cost a lot of money. It will require thinking differently, though, about how PD dollars are used. And that comes with some cost, I understand that, but it does not require more money. The other thing that doesn't require a whole lot more money is to think differently about how we get schools ready for this type of teacher leadership and collective leadership. And I would dare say that the vast majority of folks lead schools not because they don't want to lead them any other way. They are running very hard. They're running very hard to fulfill all the mandates that they are facing. We've got to create some space for particularly administrators and teachers together to rethink what those school cultures look like. And I will say, while Jim, finding more time is an important technical fix that we need to put into place. You used the word respect early this morning. Just helping folks understand how we work with each other and treat each other as human beings is probably the most powerful lever that we can pull in terms of changing culture. And changing culture requires hard work, but it doesn't cost a whole lot of money. And I would dare say, like we're seeing in South Carolina where we're doing some work, some dramatic shifts with some tools and processes that our colleagues there are using to just shift culture. And we're already finding dramatic decreases in teacher attrition. And then finally, also, I think is extremely important, the story of these 5 teachers over here are pretty easy to elevate, but I guarantee you, you 5 have probably 50 teachers that you work with, and I'm just guessing, whose stories are just as powerful as yours. How do we begin to take a network like Keen? It's a powerful resource. You already have them organized. How do we help organize their stories, but not just theirs, but the stories of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds? And how do we begin to use this thing called social media to really inform, engage, and inspire the public? Let me close by saying that the public cares deeply about public education, and they care deeply about teachers and administrators who support public education. And while there are many great efforts across this land and in Kansas to capitalize on that asset, I think we've got to do a lot more. We have better evidence than ever before of what works. We know where to find what's working and how to adapt it and reinvent it in our own place. And we have what is the most important resource. You 120 people in this room here today, and the hundreds and hundreds of folks you work with every day. If we can just kind of put our forces together, I guarantee you we can finally create the profession that makes all others possible. Thank you very much. Questions? I think we have time, right? How did I do for time? I totally lost. I have no idea how long I was. Okay. Oh, yes, ma'am.
So, on your
Teacher voice.
Is there anything about class sizes on your survey?
Yes, and it does have some modest predictive quality to it. The problem is those big databases don't capture class size and its nuance, because oftentimes class sizes are so different inside of a school or even inside of a classroom, and as teachers get more sophisticated with their knowledge, they're doing some really amazing things with regrouping kids, right? And co-teaching models and so forth. So it's not real easy for us to detect the power of class size. And for years it's shown to have a difference in terms of student achievement, but not a lot. I was with a teacher, though, that teacher I quoted a good bit from the low poverty school. When I asked her in the interview what she might want to see next to kind of build these relationships that she thinks are so paramount to good practice and really powerful public education, she says, "We did away with looping years ago. I wish we'd come back to that. I got to know the children and parents so well. I saved so much more time, and I was so much better with them." I think there are all kinds of ways to think differently about schools. This is why I'm excited about your innovation work and how you're beginning to think very differently about those resources, the kids, the parents, the community, and the teachers in a building. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's great what you're putting together, but as a teacher in the classroom, nothing you put together surprises me. I mean, it's the kinds of things that we as educators have been saying for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find is that in our most challenging schools, highest poverty schools, et cetera, those are the places where we clamp down the most and we micromanage the most because we hit the panic button. These kids are coming in ill-prepared, they aren't scoring well on tests, and so we allow the least amount of faculty input there. And people then leave, experienced people leave because they don't have a voice in what's happening in those buildings. So I guess as an educator, how do we get people to listen to us? Because we've been saying these things, we've been thinking these things.
Okay.
How do we get people to listen to teachers?
Okay. You're speaking to me in a big, powerful, and heartfelt way. I think as a recovering academic, as a former teacher and a recovering academic, some of the best work that I think my nonprofit has done is to help teachers tell their story to inform and inspire people to action. It's been the most difficult thing to have funded, either by philanthropy or clearly by agencies and so forth, and I totally understand it. It's, communications is the first thing to go, and most school districts have very little in a communications budget to begin with. But, because let's be truthful, these data that I shared with you today, I think they go deeper. They're more nuanced. I hope you found them to be. But Rick, how different is this from 30 years ago? Very little, right? We live in a world, and I think it's more so today, that the facts of the matter is that the facts don't matter as much as we'd like for them to. It is what it is, but we do know something else, and there's actually good cognitive research around this. Stories do inspire. How can we help your voice be heard in a more collective way, not just in a singular way? How do we help that voice be heard around solutions, not just problems? Okay? And how can we inspire action amongst a public of which 2 out of 3 have trust and confidence in you? I cannot tell you that would, if I could only do that the rest of my career, I'm looking at my dear friend back in the back too, because he knows my work, and we continue to want to work together for as much as we possibly can. I would do this. This would be the number one thing that I would work on, but it is the most challenging part. Most parents are not happy with the accountability system. But we've got to take action. We've got to tell positive stories from the classroom to inform and inspire. And it's not easy to do for an agency or a university or a set of nonprofits, but I bet we could figure out how to do more of it if we work together. If we work together. Put our resources together. Consortium of districts putting their resources together. Districts may not have much of a communications budget, but I guarantee you, your colleagues right next door are willing to work with you on this as well. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, Debbie.
So you really intrigued me talking about the greening of the profession.
Yes.
And we're finding that in Kansas. Our largest quadrant of teachers, 1 to 4 years of experience. So do you have examples where institutions, teacher preparation programs have worked very effectively with districts to support beginning teachers?
Yes, in isolated programs, not coherent strategies. There are plenty of programs, even like the University of South Carolina now has a pretty good, I think actually potentially a really good induction program for new teachers for its graduates right now. They're still struggling to find the funding model of how a university that prepares X number of teachers continues to support them, right? But it doesn't necessarily fit inside a larger PD strategy for the districts whom they would be ultimately supporting. So there are countless examples, Debbie, of how it's working in little bits and pieces. I think what we don't have is a comprehensive strategy. I think we got to learn to live with the fact that our schools will not be staffed with full career teachers at full tilt. And by the way, if you look historically, teachers never taught 30 straight years anyway. Now we will, but a lot fewer teachers will be doing that. But here's what, you could change the world if you had 25 to 50% of your teachers as career teachers, and if you organize them differently, they could really support growing numbers of itinerant teachers, or how about teachers that kids are accessing through this thing called the internet? How do we start using those career, experienced, accomplished teachers in this room differently? How do we pay them more? There's no reason in the world that teachers of your quality and experience and commitment shouldn't be making 6 figures and should have time and space to support this growing greener population of teachers.
So I have a leadership question.
Yes, Michelle.
Having been a former building principal, district leader, superintendent, and I listen to all of this and I reflect on my own leadership and think, how did I or how might I have not created that environment, that workplace condition for my teachers to feel like they could be successful? And it goes to the point made back here too. So I just wonder if you could speak a little bit more about that supportive administration, how that may impede that system or that building's ability to do just exactly what she's speaking of.
The first thing we find in highly supportive principals who are really darn good, another technical term, at cultivating and supporting teachers as leaders, those principals have support from superintendents and others for that type of leadership, and that's number one. I didn't go into this in great deal. This is kind of our research-based framework that we're using at CTQ to kind of fuel what we call teacher and collective leadership. All these need to be in place. Those on the left side of the screen are what we call more antecedents to what needs to happen on the right side of the screen. Oftentimes we do well on 1 or 2 of these, but if you don't have all 7 in place, you either end up with incompleted effort or confusion, anxiety, or misplaced expectations. We need a concerted effort to rethink principal preparation. I would be the first to say as a recovering academic. And I would dare say, if you could think Venn diagram with me, teacher leadership development is here. principal administrative developments here. Oh, what did I just do? There's a nice swath in the middle where we ought to have teachers and administrators learning to lead together. And learning to lead is not just a set of trainings, but also it's an opportunity and a process for folks to think big, start small, learn fast, and go public with their evidence, which I think is instrumental to any kind of change process. Hopefully that helps. Yes, ma'am.
A couple of questions regarding the salary aspect.
Yes.
First one is, do you see most districts paying teachers to be leaders? Via stipends or to recognize their additional skills?
Yes. In fact, what's really interesting, a number of organizations, research shops are just beginning to assemble some kind of lay of the land on teacher leadership, which, by the way, is still an ill-defined concept. It means so many things to so many different people, which is hard to, use it as a transformative lever if we can't really articulate what it is. But that's another story. There are plenty of places. When I say plenty, of course, this is primarily urban schools. A survey of a few years ago suggests that 8 in 10 districts of the great city schools, which is about a couple hundred of the largest school systems in the country, where they have more resources than many small districts, by the way, but they have formal leadership programs in place in some form or fashion. Oftentimes, though, those leadership roles are narrow, and they are handed to teachers to execute, or the task to be executed, and it really doesn't touch all teachers. I have a bias. I think the fact that teacher leadership is becoming a thing after all these years is really good thing. But teacher leadership for just a few is not going to help us meet the challenges that we need to meet in order to serve all kids with the kind of socio-emotional learning issues that we need to address, the kind of cognitive skills for the gig economy that need to be addressed, for how about in the many high-need school communities, the community-based services and supports that all kids need. That requires a brand of teacher leadership. 75% of the principals in this country report that their job is too complex. And we ask, Michelle, way too much of them. We have not done this formally, but in my interviews with teachers in North Carolina, and then plus some other work we're doing in Pomona, I can't find a teacher that reports, and administrators, reports working less than 60 hours a week right now. We ought to ask that question. We ought to know. Emotional exhaustion, Rick. A lot of teachers and administrators are facing that.
The second question is, of those states that implemented some type of a merit-based pay system, I guess as a result of their ESEA waivers, what has been shown, if anything, from that? Was it positive, negative? Tell me otherwise. There's some researchers and practitioners in the room who may be more familiar than I, but I'm a pretty keen observer, and I've actually been fortunate enough over the years to study these. Rick and I actually did a study a long time ago on principal merit pay, I believe. I've not seen one study that shows that it works. And we've tried some form of merit pay, believe it or not, in this country since the 1920s. If you really want to go academic with me on it, there's a piece that Dick Murnane, who I think may still be at Harvard. I don't know, Dick, is he still around? He wrote a piece in 1986 on why merit pay failed, kind of tracing the missteps and problems of the previous decades, like from the 50s on. Take a look at that, and then go back and look at what Vanderbilt did and Rand Corporation did on studies of merit pay of the Race to the Top thing, and the findings look remarkably similar. So that doesn't mean we don't pay teachers and administrators for getting things done, for spurring innovation, for getting results. It's just not done probably in the technocratic way that we have expected it to be done in the past. Don't y'all think you ought to get more when we get things done? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, yes.
So do you have any, as far as like with special education and regular education working together, or like that co-teaching model? Because I've done that co-teaching model and I thought it was extremely successful.
What I love about co-teaching is that it instantaneously deprivatizes practice, which for teachers, which you are never going to develop as a leader as long as you stay in the four walls of your own classroom. How could you or how would you expect anyone to lead under those circumstances? So we probably can't afford for every teacher to be in a co-teaching role, but I guarantee you we can do more to create a myriad of opportunities for teachers to co-teach, and we can use this thing called technology to help folks even know what each other are doing and why. This small rural district in Clarendon, that's county in South Carolina, is using Twitter feed for kids and teachers with the monitors in their classrooms. Now, it may sound like distracting to you, but they are using Twitter feed from time to time to show what's going on in each other's classrooms and what's working. Isn't that kind of cool? I mean, so co-teaching can look in a variety of different ways, and I think we can use technology much more effectively to create more opportunities for teachers to de-silo their practice.
It worked great because I was with the regular ed teacher who was the content expert. And then I came in as like the accommodations kind
Yeah.
of expert.
I'm-
And it was win-win.
I am happily married of 42 years to a special ed, or now retired special ed teacher, and there's a lot that I learned from her, and the power of her expertise just in terms of how she was trained, but also the fact that she was so good because she learned from and with so many teachers all the time. We need more opportunities for more teachers to do that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to go back to the Teacher Merit Pay program.
Yes.
So there is a meta-analysis and systematic review from Vanderbilt that
Yeah.
looks at the Teacher Merit Pay program.
Mhm.
And so that includes, work from Rand Corporation
Yeah.
and, Matt Springer. And they do find that looking sort of systematically over the past 20, 25 years, there is a small, but positive, a small effect of the Teacher Merit Pay program on student learning. It's not huge, but it's statistically significant. They do also have a little bit of evidence about how teacher merit pay programs can potentially increase teacher retention for those particular
Yes, but those differences are so small, I would not bet the bank on ed policy. And as you know, there's a difference between even statistical significance and educational significance.
Right.
And where's our best bang for the buck? Should we put more money into co-teaching where teachers are helping each other get better? And by the way, think about an evaluation system that rates you at the highest level only when you help another teacher get better, as well as helping your kids do better. Think about how we might use resources in a very different way, policy in a different way, to spread expertise. We know from this research, not just some of which I showed you, but there's a wealth that's coming down the pike that shows the power of collaboration. And if merit pay doesn't, in some form or fashion, really value teachers working with each other, as opposed to teachers hoarding their own lessons and expertise, then we're not going to be able to serve the kids that we need to in the future.
Yes, to that point,
Yeah.
when I say small, I'm talking about 3 to 4 weeks of learning over the year. But they do find that when there is teacher collaboration for the merit pay, meaning like groups of teachers get the award together, then that is about twice as big as on sort of average for everybody individually. So there is some. Certainly goes to your point about how if there is inclusion in teacher leadership and collaboration, that could have a bigger effect than if it's like every man for himself.
Yeah, which is, forgive me, because I thought that's what you were implying with usually when we think about merit pay, it's about the one teacher getting rewards for getting this gain or having this performance indicator met or whatever. But yeah, excellent point, yeah. I know we had, yes ma'am.
Expand on work structures and ones that have positive impact,
Work structures?
and then ones that examples of positives.
Okay. So, okay, I'm gonna take you to, the Denver School for Innovation Sustainable Design, a 500 kid public high school near downtown Denver that took its resources and redesigned for high school a model of interdisciplinary curriculum and teacher planning and assessment that took teachers to having about 4 to 5 hours a week in teams to look at student evidence and make decisions about what to teach next. That school has virtually no turnover and has increasingly high marks on performance. So work structures that I think more than anything else that seem to make a very powerful difference are opportunities for teachers to engage not just in any type of collaboration, but this kind of more authentic, teacher-led, teacher inquiry, PLC, not just as data-driven, but inquiry-driven sort of approach, and enough space to make it happen and for it to be meaningful for all teachers in a building, and not just a few. That's what I mean by work structures. Is that helpful? Okay, good. By the way, there are lots of schools like that across the country. We don't know where they all are, but there are thousands and thousands and thousands of schools like that. Yes, sir.
The biggest disparity in your data was the difference in discipline between the high and low socioeconomic
Yeah.
standing schools. Can you generalize that? Is that the elephant in the room rather than training or planning?
The qualitative data suggests that teachers are very ill prepared and are not there long enough to know the kid and the family. So I don't think it's the kid's fault. And by the way, I don't think it's the teacher's fault either. We put many teachers in situations where they're not prepared. And it's not just the traditional sort of shortcut in the teaching too. We have fully prepared teachers in Western North Carolina who did their student teaching in low poverty schools end up in a job in Eastern North Carolina working with high poverty kids in a high poverty community. And they aren't real ready either, my friend. So we're putting folks in a situation that is really pretty much untenable. I don't think it's the kids. I mean, kids do have enormous challenges, but our schools aren't designed to respond to them, and teachers are not working in teams and in work structures that allow them to be more responsive. I think that's the where I would land on that question. Thank you very much. And let's get this done before Rick turns 100.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. It was interesting during most of that. You can really tell who the classroom teachers are, because you're right. They're shaking their heads going, we're trying. We need our story out there. So I love what you said about share those stories, get them out there, and we do have a chance to change the face of the way people look at us as professionals in the classroom. We'll take